The day we buried my wife, my grandson knelt beside her casket, looked up at me and said, "Grandpa, when is Grandma coming back?" I didn't have an answer for him. What I didn't know yet was that in less than 2 weeks, I would have come within a single signature of handing over everything she died trying to protect. Before I tell you what I found in the back of her closet, do me a favor. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I'm telling this story because somewhere out there, another old fool might be ignoring the warning signs the way I did, and maybe, just maybe, this keeps your family whole. My name doesn't matter much. I'm 71 years old, retired 30 years as a high school shop teacher in a small town outside Spokane, Washington. My wife and I were married 44 years. Her name was Margaret, but I never once called her that. To me, she was just my girl. Right up until the morning a state trooper knocked on my door and told me her car had gone off Route 2 in the early fog and rolled down into the gully by Deer Creek. They said she'd been driving too fast. They said the road was slick. They said a lot of things that morning, and I nodded along to all of it because the world had stopped making sense and I was just trying to stay standing. The funeral was on a gray Thursday. Our church was full. Margaret had taught Sunday school for 20 years, and there were grown men and women there who'd learned their Bible verses sitting on her knee. My son-in-law stood beside me through the whole service, his hand on my shoulder, saying all the right things. I'll call him my son-in-law because even now I can't stand to put his name in my mouth more than I have to. He was married to my only daughter, who passed of cancer 4 years back, and he had custody of my grandson, a sweet, quiet boy of 6 who had Margaret's same crooked smile. After the burial, we drove back to the house, and that's when the first thing went wrong, though I was too numb to see it for what it was. My son-in-law followed me inside, and before I'd even hung up my coat, he was already talking about Margaret's things. "We should box all this up, Pop. Today, while you've got help. Trust me, you don't want to be looking at her sweaters every morning. It'll eat you alive." He was already in the hall closet, pulling her coats off the hangers, dropping them into a trash bag. I told him to stop. I told him I wasn't ready. He smiled this patient, almost rehearsed smile and said grief had a way of fooling people, that the kindest thing was to clear it all out fast and start fresh. "The sooner it's gone, the sooner you heal," he said. I read that somewhere. There was something about how quick his hands moved. A man whose mourning is slow. He fumbles. He stops to hold the thing and remember. My son-in-law walked through her closet like he was packing up a motel room before checkout. By the time I got him to leave that evening, 3 garbage bags sat by the front door, and he'd asked me twice, real casual, whether Margaret kept any important papers in the house and where she'd put them. That night, I couldn't sleep. The bed was too big and too cold. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up and went into her closet just to be near her things, to smell her, and I started putting her clothes back on the hangers one by one because I'd be damned if any son-in-law of mine was going to throw my girl away in trash bags. That's when I found it. Pushed way back behind her winter boots, under a folded quilt, there was a small fireproof document box, the kind you buy at the office store. I'd never seen it before in 44 years. It wasn't locked. Inside, sitting on top, was a sheet of her stationery, the pale blue paper with the little robins in the corner that she used for her letters, and in her handwriting it said, "If you found this, then I was right, and I'm sorry I didn't have proof sooner. Don't trust him. Start with the Glean folder." My hands started shaking and they didn't stop for a long while. Under the note was a life insurance policy I never knew she had. $250,000. The beneficiary line didn't say my name. It said my grandson's name in a trust with one trustee listed, and it wasn't me. It was my son-in-law. There was a green folder, just like she said. Inside were photocopies of bank statements, my son-in-law's, though God knows how she got them. Deposits that didn't make sense for a man who managed a tire store. 8,000 here, 12,000 there, wired in from something called Cascade Holdings LLC. And clipped to those was a printout from the county assessor's office, showing that 6 weeks before she died, my son-in-law had quietly taken out a second mortgage on the house his daughter, my granddaughter-in-law, his late wife, had left in trust for my grandson. He'd borrowed against my grandson's inheritance. There was a business card too. A man named Holt, Estate and Elder Services, with a cell number. And there was a thumb drive in a little plastic sleeve with a piece of masking tape on it that said in Margaret's print, "Listen to this first." I want to tell you I was smart that night. I wasn't. I sat on the floor of my dead wife's closet and I cried like the old man I am. But somewhere in all that crying, something hard and cold settled into my chest, and I knew I wasn't going to let this go. In the morning, I drove to the library because I didn't trust the computer in my own house anymore, and I asked the young woman at the desk to help me play the thumb drive. She set me up at a back carrel with headphones, and I pressed play, and there was Margaret's voice, clear as if she were sitting next to me. "It's Tuesday," she said. "I followed him today like a crazy person I know. He didn't go to the tire store. He went to a building downtown, the one with the lawyers. He met a man in a gray suit in the parking garage. They shook hands like they'd done business before. I got the man's plate." She read off a license number. Then her voice dropped lower. "I'm scared to say this out loud, but I think he's planning to put Daddy." That's what she called me in front of the grandbaby. "Daddy, I think he's planning to put Daddy in a home and take the house. And I think this Holt man is helping him do it legally before anybody can stop it. I don't have enough yet. I need one more week." The recording ended. She never got her week. I sat in that library a long time with the headphones still on, listening to the dead air. A man came over to vacuum and I lifted my feet without even seeing him. My girl had been afraid, alone, gathering proof, and I'd been right there in the house with her, oblivious, snoring through it. The shame of that is a thing I will carry to my own grave. When I finally drove home, I made a list on the back of an envelope, the way she always teased me for doing. Find out who Holt is. Find out what Cascade Holdings is. Find out what my son-in-law signed. And keep my grandson safe, because if there was money tied to that boy, then that boy was in the middle of something dangerous, and he was 6 years old and didn't even know it. That afternoon, my son-in-law called. Real friendly. Said he'd been thinking, and with everything I was going through, maybe it was time I let him help manage the finances and the property. He said he'd already spoken to a specialist who handles this kind of transition for seniors. He said the man could come by Friday with some paperwork. Nothing major, just power of attorney so he could take the weight off my shoulders. Power of attorney. Friday. 3 days away. Margaret had said she needed one more week. I understood then that I had no week. I had 3 days. I said that sounded real thoughtful and I'd see him Friday. Then I hung up and threw up in the kitchen sink. I called the number for Holt myself. Blocked. From a payphone outside the grocery store. Yes, we still have one of those in my town. A smooth voice answered. Holt Elder and Estate Services. I hung up. Then I called the non-emergency line for the county sheriff and asked if there was anybody who handled crimes against old people. They put me through to a detective named Okafor. I told her I thought my son-in-law was trying to steal my house and might have had something to do with my wife's car accident. And there was a silence on the line. And then she said, "Sir, can you come in today?" I almost didn't go. You have to understand, this was my daughter's husband, the father of the only grandchild I had left in this world. If I was wrong, I'd be poisoning the last family I had. But I thought about Margaret's voice on that drive, and I drove to the sheriff's office. Detective Okafor was younger than my own kids would have been, sharp-eyed, patient. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I played her the recording on the thumb drive, her face changed. She asked if she could keep the box. I said I'd made copies of everything at the library, which made her almost smile, and she said, "Mister, you did exactly right." Then she told me something that turned my blood to ice water. She pulled up Margaret's accident report on a screen. The state patrol had found something they'd flagged but hadn't yet acted on. The brake fluid line on Margaret's old Buick had a clean cut in it, not a wear tear. A cut, the kind a knife makes, and it had been pinched closed with a small clamp so it'd hold for a while and then fail. Fail on a slick road, on a downhill, in the fog. They'd been waiting on a mechanic's report. Detective Okafor said, "Quiet, mister. I'm reclassifying your wife's death today. This is a homicide investigation now." Homicide. The word just sat in the room like a third person. She asked me who'd had access to Margaret's car, and I had to say it. My son-in-law had borrowed it 2 weeks before the accident, said his truck was in the shop, kept it 3 days. I thought nothing of it. I'd waved at him from the porch when he brought it back. Detective Okafor leaned forward and laid it out plain. There wasn't enough yet to arrest anybody. A cut brake line, suspicious deposits, a recording of a worried wife. It pointed somewhere, but a good lawyer would tear it apart. What they needed was him saying it, admitting it. She asked me, real gentle, if I thought I could sit across from my son-in-law wearing a wire and let him talk. I told her I'd raised 2 kids and buried one, and now buried my wife, and there wasn't much left they could do to my heart. So yes, I could do it. But I said I had one condition. My grandson had to be somewhere safe before I did anything. I wasn't going to spring a trap with that boy under the same roof. We agreed I'd have my grandson stay with Margaret's sister, his great-aunt, who lived 2 towns over. I called her that evening and said only that I needed a few days, and being family, she didn't ask why. The boy didn't want to go. He clung to my leg and said he wanted to stay with Grandpa, and I knelt down. My knees aren't what they were, and I told him Grandpa had some grown-up things to fix, and when they were fixed, I'd come get him and we'd go fishing at the creek like we always did. He looked at me with Margaret's eyes and said, "You promise?" And I promised. It's the only promise in this whole story I was sure I'd keep. The next 2 days, Detective Okafor and a quiet young deputy taught me how to wear the wire and what to do. "Don't lead him," she said. "Let him talk. Don't accuse, just be the sad, confused old man," which God knows wasn't much of an act. And if I ever felt unsafe, I was to say the words, "I think Margaret would understand," and they'd be through the door in under a minute. They had a code word and everything. I felt like I was in one of those shows Margaret used to watch. On the second night before the trap, my son-in-law dropped by unannounced. I about jumped out of my skin. He had a folder under his arm. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Margaret used to roll out her pie crust, and he slid papers across to me, friendly as you please, and started explaining the power of attorney like I was a child. "It just lets me handle the boring stuff, Pop, the bills, the house. You shouldn't have to worry about a thing at your age." I let him talk. I asked questions a confused old man would ask. And then I asked, careful, what happens to the house? And he smiled and said, "Don't you worry about the house." And I asked about the boy's trust, the one his late wife had set up, and for just a half second his smile flickered, the way ice cracks before it gives, and he said, "That's complicated, Pop. There were debts. I had to make some moves to protect it." Protect it. He'd borrowed against the dead woman's gift to her own son and called it protection. I signed nothing that night. I told him my eyes were too tired to read the small print, and I'd sign Friday with the specialist there. He didn't like that, but he left. Friday came. Detective Okafor's people were parked in a van down the block and another car around the corner. They wired me up in my own bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror, this old man with the tape on his chest, and I said a little prayer. Not a fancy one. Just, "Lord, give me the steadiness to see this through, and let it be for her." My son-in-law arrived at 4 with the man named Holt, the gray-suit man from Margaret's recording. Holt had a leather portfolio and a salesman's handshake. They sat at my kitchen table and spread out the papers, and Holt began walking me through them. Power of attorney, a quitclaim deed transferring the house, and the third document I didn't understand that signed away my role as any kind of guardian to my grandson. I asked them to slow down. I said I just wanted to understand, and then I asked the question I'd been holding in my chest for 3 days. I looked my son-in-law in the eye and I said, "Son, before I sign anything, Did Margaret know about all this? Did you talk to her about it before she passed? And there it was. He glanced at Holt, and Holt gave a tiny shake of the head, and my son-in-law said, Margaret didn't understand the bigger picture, Pop. She got in the way of things. She would have messed it all up. Got in the way how? I asked. He was getting impatient now, the mask slipping with the smell of money so close. She was snooping. She found some statements she shouldn't have. She was going to take everything to the wrong people. I tried to reason with her. He shrugged, this awful casual shrug. Some people just won't listen. What happened the day her car went off the road? I asked, and my voice didn't shake, which surprised me. Did you have something to do with that? Holt stood up fast. We're done here. But my son-in-law, God help him, he was looking at all those papers, all that house, all that money, and the greed had him by the throat, and he said the thing that ended him. He said it was supposed to look like an accident, and it did. Don't sit there and act holy with me, old man. You're going in a home one way or another. Sign the papers and at least the boy keeps a roof. Don't, and I'll have you declared incompetent by Monday. I said the words. I think Margaret would understand. For a second, nothing happened, and the longest second of my life stretched out across that kitchen, and I thought maybe the wire had failed. Maybe I was alone with two men who'd already killed once. Then the back door came off its hinges, near about, and the front door too, and Detective Okafor was shouting, and there were deputies everywhere, and Holt was reaching into his portfolio for something, and they had him on the floor before he found it. My son-in-law looked at me across that table, his daughter's pie crust table, and the betrayal in his eyes, like I was the one who'd done him wrong. They cuffed him standing right where he'd stood with his hand on my shoulder at the funeral. As they walked him out, he twisted around and yelled that I'd ruined everything, that the boy would grow up with nothing now, that this was my fault. I didn't answer him. There wasn't anything left in me that wanted to. Detective Okafor stayed after. She told me Holt wasn't a real estate specialist at all. He was a disbarred attorney who ran a scheme targeting recently widowed seniors. Find an old person with a paid-off house and a grieving fog over their eyes, get a relative on the inside, paper them out of everything before they came to their senses. They found 4 other families. Margaret hadn't just been protecting me. She'd stumbled onto something that was hurting strangers all over the county. The investigation took months. The cut brake line, the clamp, the deposits from Cascade Holdings, which turned out to be Holt's shell company, and most of all, my son-in-law's own words at that kitchen table, recorded clean. They charged him with first-degree murder and a stack of fraud counts. Holt went down for the fraud and as an accessory. There was a mechanic too, a fellow my son-in-law had paid in cash to do the cutting, and when they squeezed him, he gave everybody up. I sat in that courtroom every single day. Not for him, for her. When they read the verdict, guilty, on all of it, I didn't cheer like some folks expected. I just put my hand flat on the wooden rail in front of me and I said under my breath, I heard you, my girl. I finally heard you. My son-in-law got life without parole. Holt got 22 years. The mechanic got 12. The hardest part wasn't the trial. The hardest part was my grandson. How do you tell a 6-year-old that the man he calls daddy did a terrible thing and won't be coming home? I didn't tell him all of it. I told him his daddy made some bad choices and had to go away for a long time, and that I would be his family now, me and the memory of his grandma. He cried. He asked if it was his fault. I held him and told him no, never, that none of it was ever his. That he was the best thing the good Lord ever made and his grandma had loved him more than her own life, which was the plain truth. I became his legal guardian. At 71, I'm raising a boy again, packing lunches and learning what cartoons he likes and sitting through school plays in a folding chair. Some mornings my back screams at me and I wonder what I'm doing. And then he runs out of his classroom and yells, "Grandpa," across the parking lot. And I remember exactly what I'm doing. The insurance trust, the part my son-in-law tried to steal. The court protected it. It saw the boys locked up tight until he's grown, with the bank as trustee now and me with no way to touch it, even if I wanted to, which is exactly how Margaret would have wanted it. She always was smarter than me about money. I did one more thing. With a little of my own savings, I started a small fund through our church, named for her, that helps widows and widowers in the county sort out their affairs before some smiling vulture can get to them. Free help, an honest lawyer who volunteers, a few of us who just sit with the grieving so they're not alone when the paperwork comes. We've helped 19 families so far. Every one of them is Margaret reaching out from heaven to catch somebody before they fall the way she nearly let me fall. I still go to the creek on Saturdays. The boy and I bring her old folding chair and set it open on the bank, empty, because that's where she used to sit and read while we fished. And it just feels right to leave room for her. He caught a trout last week, his first one, and he held it up and looked at the sky and said, "Did you see that, Grandma?" And I'll be honest with you, a bird went up out of the reeds right then, just a little brown bird, nothing special, and the boy gasped like it was an angel. Maybe it was. I'm too old to say it wasn't. Here's what I'd ask of you, whoever you are, listening wherever you are tonight. When somebody you love starts trying to rush you through your grief, starts asking about your papers and your house and your money before the ground over your loved one has even settled, slow down. Don't sign a thing. The people who truly love you are never in a hurry to part you from what's yours. Margaret tried to tell me with her own scared voice on a thumb drive, and I came within 3 days and 1 signature of losing it all because I didn't want to believe the worst about family. Trust the small voice that tells you something's wrong. Trust the people who've earned it. And when the truth is ugly, find the courage to look at it anyway. Because somewhere in your house, there might be a blue note in a quiet box, written by someone who loved you, hoping with everything they had that you'd be brave enough to read it. I read it, my girl. Late, but I read it. And I'll spend whatever years I've got left making sure it mattered. The warning signs were all there long before that gray Thursday, and I was the one who chose not to see them. When my son-in-law moved through Margaret's closet like a man stripping a motel room, when he asked twice about her important papers before her grave had even settled, when his hands moved fast where a grieving man's hands move slow, every one of those moments was the truth knocking, and I kept the door shut because I didn't want to believe family could do that to family. That's the first thing I'd want you to carry away from what I lived through. Comfort lies to you, the easy story, the one that lets you keep loving the people you've already decided to love, is the most dangerous story there is. I think about cause and effect now in a way I never used to. Margaret didn't survive, and I almost lost everything, not because of bad luck on a foggy road, but because a man let greed quiet his conscience until a human life weighed less to him than a paid-off house. Strip away a person's sense of right and wrong and there is nothing left to stop them. And the people closest to them pay first. I learned that the hard way, sitting in a courtroom every single day, watching a man I'd welcomed into my family answer for what he'd done to mine. But conscience alone wouldn't have saved my grandson's future. Margaret had the good heart, yes, but she also had the clear head to follow her husband, write down a license plate, copy bank statements, and hide a recording where only love would think to look. And when it fell to me, I had to do the same. Slow down, make a list on the back of an envelope, call a detective instead of signing what a smiling man slid across the table. Goodness without the wisdom to act on it is just a nice feeling. It was Margaret's willingness to gather proof and mine to finally read it that turned heartbreak into something that could stand up in front of a jury. And none of it would have mattered without the plain stubbornness to see it through when every part of me wanted to look away. Wearing that wire at 71, sending my grandson to his great-aunt's, asking my son-in-law to his face whether he'd cut my wife's brakes. That took a kind of endurance I didn't know an old man still had in him. You find it when you have to. You find it when someone you love is counting on you from a place they can no longer speak. So if there's a small voice in your house tonight telling you something's wrong, Don't drown it out because the truth is inconvenient. Be honest enough to face the worst, sharp enough to gather the proof, and tough enough to act before it's too late. Margaret tried to tell me, and I nearly missed it by 3 days and 1 signature. Don't you make me the cautionary tale you wished you'd listened to.